Hello, Internet, and welcome to this, my third US road trip diary video, where I'm taking us from the wilds of South Carolina through my first visit to Washington, D.C., and to the old town and battleground of Gettysburg. My first visit to Gettysburg, and the place that actually brought out my interest in 18th century military history, which later would become my specialty when reading at the history at the university. So yeah, enjoy. Last time I talked about us visiting Charleston and getting lost on the South Carolina back roads. The This particularly part of the journey was not so eventful. We were driving from Santee to Washington, D.C. in two stages, with a stopover in Charlottesville, Virginia, and the actual trip, at least on the first day, nothing much happened. We visited Natural Bridge in Virginia, which I have talked about in my Yet More Places to See video, so I'm not going to recap here, except that I once again want to advertise for the fact that according to a local signpost, Natural Bridge was formed by erosion over 200,000 million years, which is impressive, and you should go see it, since that means that that particular area is actually older than the rest of the universe, so, that's always interesting. Other than that, we went to Charlottesville, we had some dinner, we slept, and then we started moving up towards DC. However, instead of taking the direct route through the freeways, we wanted to go by Shenandoah Skyline Drive, which honestly is one of my four favorite driving roads in America by now. That, Blue Ridge Parkway, the going to the Sun Road in Glacier, and US 1 all the way out at the Pacific coast in California. It's a pay road, but back then it was $5, so you could drive in and out of again for a week, so it wasn't that terrible. The picture you see is our first close contact with American wildlife, apart from a single bat which has, well, basically circled above us all evening the night before because we were eating fruit at the hotel in Charlottesville. Later, I have seen much, much more American wildlife and been very, very close to American wildlife, but this particular deer was the first time we actually just saw any kind of large mammal coming very, very close to the car and not giving a crap about us stupid tourists. So it has special meaning for my family, and again, something you can see on Shenandoah Skyline Drive. It's also an amazing view out over the Shenandoah Valley and the Virginia countryside all put together, and it is where my grandfather made the, in my family, immortal comment that, yeah, they're wasting space here. Which basically was his idea that, in Denmark, we are such a small country. We know what to do with everything. Here, there's just so much space. We're wasting it. I always liked that. Now I have had a lot more driving experience, but back then, Skyline Drive and the couple days before on Blue Ridge Parkway was something I felt like that was the height of my car driving experiences in my life. And even today, it's still, as I said, one of the most amazing places to go and drive in a car. I have said this before, Americans, my friends, go on road trips in your own country. You don't know what you're missing. We did leave Skyline Drive for a little while, though, because at Luray, we wanted to visit the local caves. Luray Caves is the biggest in the Virginia Shenandoah area, and as someone of you might know, have a thing for caves, that is something that we wanted to visit with our family. And there is everything in Luray Caverns. There are stalactites, stalagmites, underground lakes with blind fish, basically everything that you think about when you think of caves is something you can see in Luray Caverns, including the Great Stalacpipe Organ, which is basically a organ that works by hitting various stalagmites with little bit hammers, which then gives off various tones. You can actually play fairly good music on it, and many people are married in Luray Caverns with the wedding march being played on this natural occurring organ. After Luray Caverns, it was really good, and after Luray Caverns, we then moved back to Skyline Drive and took it up to Washington, D.C., and ended that day there. Well, my first visit to Washington, D.C. Now, D.C. will never be one of my favorite cities to live in or to get around in. Well, honestly, it's not all that interesting, and it's basically, since, everyone who lives there are basically a bunch of government workers or people who deal with the federal government, and they're not all that interesting. However, it is certainly one of my favorite cities to walk around and look at. The various museums and governmental architectural buildings and so on, it's very, very, very interesting. And this was my first time in DC, which had, of course, loomed large in my childhood as with everything else. All Danish television talked about the United States and Washington, D.C. on a regular basis. We started the day around the Capitol. My mother really wanted to get in on a tour to see the Capitol building. However, the line was so long that the rest of us decided no, that we didn't want to wait 3 hours to stand in line and then an hour walking around. We would lose most of the day since we only had 2 days in DC. My mother, however, continued to believe that this was something she really wanted to do, and when she was there 2 years later with my dad, she felt like, whoa, the line is absolutely gone. We can go in and watch it, except that 9/11 had happened and the building was closed for visitors. So yeah, sorry, Mom. I know you never actually got back into the Capitol, and I'm very, very sorry. The rest of us, however, mainly wanted to, at the time, see the area. So we moved around it, looking at the National Archives and the Library of Congress. The thing I really wanted to go in and have a route around in. I am a historian after all, but again, my family vetoed the whole thing. So instead, we basically walked down the mall looking at the various buildings. We were moving towards the White House, and we looked at the various buildings on the way, being very impressed by the architecture that we simply don't see in Denmark, and of course being appropriately frightened by the IRS building, abandon all hope ye who enters here. Apparently on the gates of hell, but in my opinion could also be used on the gates of all tax services anywhere in the known world. My sister really wanted to see, and my mother agreed with her, was the J. Edgar Hoover building, the tour of the FBI headquarters, and my dad and I acquiesced to that, especially since the waiting time was only about an hour or so. So we decided to go visit that. Personally, today, I don't think it was worth the money, honestly. It was mainly blackboards with pictures and text around FBI famous cases and what they're used for in modern times. And that was all very interesting. However, the guide was honestly not that inspiring. Someone perhaps with a little more zest would have made it a lot more interesting. It was, however, in the FBI building on the tour that I first and probably only time really feared that we would lose my father to the angry Americans. The guide was talking about that one of the most important duties of the FBI is to fight against all the evil people from foreign countries who even in peacetime spends many, many resources spying against the United States to get, its secrets out of them. Which is, of course, very true. Counter-espionage is very important. However, this was the time where my dad couldn't hold back a little snort and laughter, and everyone, including a very well-armed FBI agent, looked at him very, very angrily, and he refrained from, doing the cough, CIA, cough joke that I'm sure he had right on the tip of his tongue. However, since we all wanted to actually get out alive, we decided to just continue the tour and finish it in silence. If you are interested in the FBI, go see the tour, but honestly, unless they've changed it in the last 17 years, I don't think it's worth it. Back on the mall, we strolled past the White House, taking the appropriate pictures and starting our very, very big hatred of Bill Clinton for not inviting us in for tea. I mean, that was the first time we'd been there, so we felt that was the least he could do, but no. Moving down to the Lincoln Memorial, watching that, reading out for, in my case, the first time the Gettysburg Address, which was fairly interesting since the next leg of our trip would be to get to Gettysburg and taking the appropriate pictures at the Vietnam and Korean War Veterans Memorial. At this time, my feet were beginning to hurt quite a bit. I was not yet the, shall we say, experienced road trip walker. So I have mainly decided that this was time for the day to end, and I basically nagged my family enough that we decided after that to leave the rest of the day and get back to our hotel to rest. The next day was to visit Arlington Cemetery, my first visit to Arlington Cemetery, and it was very, very interesting. I will probably get a lot more back to Arlington Cemetery during the 2014 trip and possibly even the 2005 trip. However, this first time I unfortunately didn't see as much as I really, really wanted, because after the previous days my feet were in very, very bad shape. So I basically decided to leave my parents and sister for their trip and instead go with my grandparents. And since my grandmother also has a bad leg, we mostly just took the tour bus around the area, watching what could be seen from that without really getting out and walking around seeing stuff. I cannot emphasize how much I suggest anyone in Washington, D.C. goes visiting Arlington. It is amazing, and if nothing else, just to honor the dead who is buried there. However, I will return more to the cemetery during one of the trips where I actually, spend more time than just running around with it. In my case, we returned to the hotel to rest our feet before the next couple of days. The rest of my family, however, for the first time visited the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History. Unfortunately, I didn't get to see it on this particular trip, so I won't say anything. But again, this might just well be one of my 3 favorite museums in the entire world. So I will definitely return to that when we get to 2005, when I spent quite a lot of time walking around there. This concludes my first visit to the capital of the United States, Washington, D.C., and I have to say I fell in love with the town as a tourist. Again, I would never want to stay there. I don't actually much like the people there, but it's a place that everyone simply has to go see for the architecture, for the interesting buildings you can visit, for the museums. Oh God, the museums. Anyone on a road trip in the eastern United States should put off at least a day or 2 in Washington, D.C. if they've never been there before, just to see it. As a tourist, it is an incredibly interesting place. And again, one of those areas I feel that Americans themselves don't actually go visit enough, because it is very, very interesting. Go see it. After that, however, we were moving a bit west and north, because we were going to Gettysburg, but we were taking a bit of a detour to Harper's Ferry in West Virginia, which is supposed to be a very, very beautiful little town of great historical interest. It was here that John Brown started his rebellion to free all slaves and kill all slave owners that went so horribly awry. And it is true. It's a very, very interesting place to visit. The center of town itself nowadays is held with the historical buildings still standing, and it is still fairly small. It's basically 2 intersecting streets running up a steep hill at the promontory, or however you pronounce that, where the Shenandoah and Potomac rivers meet and join together. Now, it is, again, very, very interesting. It was where, as I said, John Brown wanted to kickstart his slave rebellion by taking the town and dividing the weapons kept in the armory there to the massive amount of abolitionists and slaves who would soon flock to him to overthrow the southern state and murder all slave owners. Sadly, people didn't flock to him, or rather they did, but that was to shoot at him for attacking their town, so he had to shut himself up at a local fire station where a company of US Marines led by a certain Robert E. Lee, who happened to be vacationing in the area and was asked to deal with this disturbance, finally dug him out, and John Brown was later hung, although he would of course be a almost sainted martyr for the northern soldiers during the Civil War, where Harper's Ferry changed hands about 8 times during the 4 years the war lasted. So there's a lot of Civil War memorial stuff in Harper's Ferry, and it's certainly worth to go see. We spent about 2 or 3 hours there looking at the river uniting, looking at the town itself. You should definitely do the same. It's very interesting. We also had probably the best cinnamon roll I have ever had. It was all completely newly baked. It was huge, and you got whatever glaze you were supposed to have to put on top in a little cup next to it, because it was just so new and so well done and so warm that the glaze would melt if you put it on. Oh God, I still dream about that cinnamon roll. So much that when we finally returned last year in 2016 to Harper's Ferry, we basically just went on a quest to get a new cinnamon roll, only to discover that the bakery had burned down and the cinnamon roll maker had left the town. Sad. One of the most tragic experiences of my time in the United States. Since you, dear internet, don't have this tragic experience in your backstory, I do, however, advise you to go watch Harper's Ferry, or go see and visit Harper's Ferry. It is worth every second you spend there. We, however, moved on to Gettysburg, and yeah, Gettysburg in itself, again, is in the center of the town, is kind of held in the old-fashioned style as it was around the Civil War, because naturally the town relies very heavily on Civil War tourism, with the battleground right outside town and various military cemeteries and so on and so on. And again, I could probably squee about Gettysburg for hours. This was basically where my current interest in 18th century, 17th, 18th, 19th century military history, and particularly the American Civil War and early American history started. Before this, I had been interested in history. Of course I always had, but it was in Gettysburg that I got the interest in American history, American culture, American everything, basically, that has brought me back so many times. And I can only say you need to go watch this place if you have any interest in American history, and particularly American Civil War history. I'm not going to retell the story of the Civil War or the Battle of Gettysburg here. Suffice to say that it was the largest battle fought during the American Civil War. It was where Robert E. Lee's second invasion of the North was blunted and stopped, and for many it was the turning point of the Civil War. From this moment on, the South was on its final defense, and basically less than 2 years later the war was over. However, the national park outside the town of the old battlefield is incredibly interesting to see. We went out there on several trips. I've been there, and I have spent hours just looking over everything. The amount of how it's built up, with where there are cannons that belong to various cannon batteries that are actually used in battle, were standing where they were standing back then. There are the various and enormous numbers of memorial markers and statues of people who fought there and regiments who fought there, and you can really see how the battle took place, how everything happened, and it is glorious. We started out at the northern part of the area where the battle started on the first day, north of town, and this was where we lost my little sister. because after about half an hour looking at stuff and seeing the internal flame that marks the northern part of the battle, she decided she had enough of all those fucking monuments, and decided to go back to the hotel to lie at the pool with the other side of the family. Something that today, a lot of years later, still bugs her, as her interest in history has also grown, and she has never actually seen the main part of the Gettysburg battlefield. I am sorry, little sister. I really do hope we can go there again together someday. It is amazing. The rest of us, which means my father and mother and me, moved on and saw the main part of the battlefield with all the famous names from the battle: Peach Orchard, Devil's Den, Little Round Top, etc., etc., etc. We saw for the first time why the famous Pickett's Charge was basically doomed to failure. It was, yeah, I'm not gonna keep squeeing over this, but it is amazing. You absolutely have to go see it, and it was the height for me of the 2000 trip, and at that time I simply couldn't see how anything in the United States could match up to the wonderful, interesting feeling I had visiting this place. I was wrong, naturally, as I will get into on later cases, but this was the place where, yeah, was for me where my interest in American history really started, and for that I will at least always be grateful for the chance to have gone there and see it, and I can only say everyone else should as well. We spent one more day in Gettysburg, taking horse carriage rides around the town, again seeing more of the immediate area. And after that, it was time to basically start moving back down to Knoxville to go home. So, yeah, this was at the end of that particular day. I will get back next time to our trip back down Virginia and home to Denmark. Well, that was it. I hope you all enjoyed this. It was, again, a little bit more rambly than I had originally anticipated with this particular series, but last time I was basically told that, yeah, being a little more immediate, a little more speaking off the cuff was a good thing, so I decided to go ahead with this on this particular video, yeah. I know I squeed a lot over the Civil War and American history stuff, but this is where my basic interest from America started, and yeah, it's really an important part of my life, an important part of my character, so I hope it didn't annoy you way too much to hear me just ramble on about things that interested me. Next time we will finish off the trip of 2000 and then move on to the, shall we say, more modern road trips I have been on, where we have seen a lot more varied stuff and also driven much more different distances, so we can carry longer areas around. So, until then, I have been the Sage, and I wish you all a very happy day.